I was ordered never to write this down. No report, no map marking, no coordinates. In 1944, I served as a reconnaissance scout for the Imperial Japanese Army, trained to observe coastlines, chart islands, and disappear without leaving a trace. What we found in the southern seas was not on any naval chart. Not American, not Allied, not even whispered about by fishermen. Yet we walked its black sand. We heard its jungle breathe at night. Command said exhaustion, said heat delirium. But exhaustion doesn't move shorelines overnight. Delirium doesn't ring bells from empty temples. 6 of us saw the same island, for never left it. I am telling this now because the sea still remembers, and some places do not stay hidden forever. Welcome to Combat Lore Files, where the shadows of war live on. Hit subscribe and get nightly drops of stories like this. Some missions come with maps. The ones that don't are the ones that follow you into old age. I was a forward scout in 1944 Imperial Japanese Army, trained to move ahead of the line and see what the rest of the unit was not meant to see. By that stage of the Pacific War, nothing felt stable anymore. Islands changed hands, entire garrisons went silent, and orders arrived already stripped of context. Still, even in chaos, there were rules, charts, coordinates, names for places that might kill you. This mission had none of those. The briefing took place before sunrise in a makeshift operations hut near the coast. The air was thick with salt and diesel fumes drifting in from the harbor, mixing with the sour smell of unwashed uniforms. A single lantern swung from a beam overhead, throwing long, nervous shadows across the bamboo walls. 6 of us stood there, boots planted in packed dirt, rifles slung, while a naval lieutenant cleared his throat and laid a sheet of paper on the table. It wasn't folded. It wasn't marked. It was completely blank. "We will be conducting forward reconnaissance south of established patrol routes," he said, not meeting our eyes. His voice was calm in the way men learn to sound when they are repeating someone else's words. "Your objective is simple. Observe coastlines. Note terrain. Sketch what you see. You will not engage. You will return before nightfall. Any anomalies are to be disregarded." Anomalies. Disregarded. The words felt rehearsed, polished smooth from repetition. I had heard similar language before missions that later vanished from official logs. One of the younger scouts shifted beside me, leather creaking softly. I could hear my own breathing inside my helmet, slow and controlled, but my pulse was already climbing. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. "Sir," I said, "what is the designation of the area?" The lieutenant paused for a fraction of a second too long. Then he shook his head. "There is none. That is not your concern." I had scouted coral atolls barely larger than parade grounds, volcanic outcrops no ship dared anchor near, and jungle islands rumored to be cursed by locals. Every one of them had a name, even if it was only a number scratched into a logbook. The absence of a designation was not an oversight. It was deliberate. We were dismissed quickly. No questions. No discussion. Outside, the sky was just beginning to pale, the horizon a thin gray line where sea met fog. Our boat waited at the edge of the shallows, its engine ticking softly as it cooled from an earlier patrol. I checked my pack by habit: water, rations, sketchbook, charcoal, sidearm. Everything accounted for, that at least made sense. As we pushed off, the shoreline behind us receded into a smear of shadow and palm silhouettes. The engine growled low, steady, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the open water. No one spoke. We had all learned that silence on the boat was safer than speculation. Still, I could feel it in the way the men held themselves. Something was wrong. Not danger yet. Something worse. Uncertainty. The fog thickened as we moved south, rolling in low sheets that dampened sound and blurred distance. The sun climbed higher, but its light felt muted, filtered through layers of cloud and mist. I pulled out my compass to confirm our heading, more out of habit than necessity. The needle wavered slightly before settling. I frowned, tapped the casing, and checked it again. The ocean was calm, unnaturally so. No swell, no chop. The surface lay flat and dark, like oil stretched to the horizon. Even the gulls were gone. I realized then how quiet it was. No distant engines. No aircraft. Not even the rhythmic slap of water against the hull. It felt as though sound itself was being absorbed. I looked back down at the compass. The needle trembled again, then drifted a few degrees off north before correcting itself. A minor fluctuation, perhaps. Magnetic interference was not unheard of near volcanic islands. But there were no volcanic islands marked anywhere near our projected route. I opened my sketchbook and began marking our estimated course, drawing the sea as an empty field because there was nothing else to draw. The page looked wrong already. Too much blank space. Too many unknowns. The charcoal left faint smudges on my fingers, and I rubbed them away on my trousers without thinking. An hour passed, then another. The fog did not lift. Instead, it seemed to close in, forming walls that pressed against the boat from all sides. The engine note changed slightly, as if the sound itself was being muffled. One of the men leaned toward me and whispered, "Do you smell that?" I inhaled slowly. At first, there was only salt. Then something else, a damp, earthy odor, like wet soil after rain. Jungle, land, but the sea around us was empty. I stood and scanned the horizon, heart thudding now, every sense sharpening. My training told me to trust instruments over instinct. My instincts were screaming anyway. I checked the compass a third time. The needle was no longer steady. Quivered, hesitated, and then spun halfway around before stopping at a direction that made no sense at all. That was when I understood the unease I had felt since the briefing. We were not navigating toward a place that lacked a name. We were moving toward something that refused to be fixed, measured, or recorded. I closed the sketchbook, my hands suddenly slick with sweat, and looked ahead into the fog, certain that when it finally parted, something would be waiting for us. It wasn't the ocean that troubled me first. It was the way our compass began to hesitate as dawn broke. Islands are not supposed to move, and they are not supposed to appear where the sea has been empty all your life. The fog thinned without warning, not lifting so much as peeling away, and what stood before us did not arrive gradually. One moment there was only gray water and silence, and the next there was land. Not a reef, not a low sandbar breaking the surface. A full island, rising dark and solid from the sea as if it had always been there and we were the ones who had been blind. I remember the way my breath caught in my throat, the way no one spoke, as if sound itself might cause it to vanish again. The shoreline was black, not volcanic rock exactly, but darker, smoother, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Behind it, a wall of jungle pressed inward, trees packed so tightly their canopies fused into a single mass of green shadow. No beach birds lifted at our approach. No surf broke against the shore. The water near the island lay unnaturally still, like a held breath. I checked the compass again, hoping the earlier malfunction had corrected itself. It hadn't. The needle pointed inland, toward the island, then slowly drifted east, then west, never settling. One of the men swore under his breath. Another began tapping his own compass against his palm as if it were a stubborn clock. The boat's navigation gauge flickered, the numbers dimming and brightening without pattern. Nothing aligned. Nothing agreed. "This wasn't here," someone said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement heavy with certainty. I scanned the horizon behind us. Open sea. No sign of land in any direction except straight ahead. I knew these waters. I had crossed them before on other patrols, plotted them by hand under different skies. There had never been an island here. Not allied. Not Japanese. Not even a rumor passed along by fishermen or smugglers. As we drifted closer, something about the shoreline began to bother me. At first, I thought it was the light playing tricks through the thinning fog. Then I realized the line itself was changing. The curve of the coast shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the land were adjusting its shape. A rocky outcrop that had jutted into the water moments earlier now appeared farther back, partially swallowed by shadow. The island did not feel fixed. It felt alive. The engine idled as we slowed, its low vibration trembling through the hull. I could hear the soft creak of wood, the faint clink of metal fittings, sounds that felt too loud in the surrounding stillness. Sweat ran down my spine despite the morning cool. Every instinct I had developed over years of scouting screamed that we were somewhere we were not meant to be. I opened my sketchbook again, forcing myself to document what I saw. My hand hesitated before touching charcoal to paper. The outline I drew felt like a lie the moment it formed. The proportions were wrong, the angles uncertain. I erased and tried again, but the island refused to be captured. Each glance back revealed a slightly different shape, as though it resented being observed too closely. "Landfall?" the coxswain asked, voice tight. No one answered immediately. Turning back was an option. It was always an option, at least in theory. But the orders echoed in my mind. Observe, sketch, return. And beneath that, unspoken but understood, do not invent excuses. I looked down at the water beside the boat. It was clear enough to see several meters below the surface. Yet there were no fish, no shadows moving in the depths. Just dark, empty blue that seemed to deepen the longer I stared. When a small wave lapped against the hull, it made no sound at all. We edged closer. The air changed as we crossed an invisible boundary. The smell of salt gave way to damp earth and old vegetation, thick and heavy in the lungs. I felt it settle on my tongue, metallic and bitter. Somewhere inland, something shifted. Not a sound exactly, more a pressure, like the sense of being watched without seeing eyes. The shoreline continued its subtle motion, advancing and retreating by small degrees, as if the island were testing us. I marked the time in my notebook, then the compass reading, then crossed it out when the needle swung again. Nothing held steady long enough to be reliable. The rules I trusted, distance, direction, fixed landmarks, were unraveling one by one. A thought crept in uninvited, born not of superstition but of pattern recognition. I had heard elders speak of wandering islands in half-forgotten coastal legends, places that surfaced only under certain conditions, drawn by bloodshed or imbalance. I had dismissed them then as stories meant to frighten children into obedience. Standing there now, watching the land breathe, those stories felt uncomfortably precise. The engine sputtered suddenly, coughing once before settling again. Every head snapped toward the sound. Mechanical failure was not uncommon, but the timing felt deliberate, as if the island itself had reacted to our presence. I placed my hand on the rifle slung across my chest, aware of how small and useless it felt against something I could not define. "Scout," one of the men murmured, using my role instead of my name. "Are you recording this?" "Yes," I said, though the word felt inadequate. I was recording shapes and readings, but not the unease crawling under my skin. Not the certainty that we had crossed into a space that did not obey the same rules as the rest of the world. As we drifted parallel to the coast, I noticed markings near the waterline, indentations in the dark sand, half smoothed by the tide. They were too regular to be natural, too deliberate. I leaned forward, squinting, heart pounding now, every sense sharpened to a painful edge. We debated turning back, until we saw signs that someone, or something, had already been waiting for us. The first proof that we were not alone was not a sound, not a shadow, but the mark of something that had walked there long before we arrived. We made landfall without ceremony. No shouted orders, no flags planted, no sense of arrival that usually followed boots touching hostile ground. The boat nudged against the dark shoreline as if guided there, and when I stepped down, my boots sank slightly into sand that felt warm despite the cool morning air. It was finer than volcanic grit, almost soft, yet it left no clear imprint at first, as though the ground resisted being marked. Behind me, the others disembarked in silence, each man glancing back at the sea as if expecting the island to vanish the moment we turned away from it. The jungle loomed close, far too close to the shore for comfort. Thick roots twisted out of the earth like exposed veins, and vines hung low enough to brush against our helmets. The air was heavy and damp, pressing into my chest with every breath. Somewhere within that green wall, something shifted, not fast, not slow, but deliberate. I raised a hand, signaling a halt, and crouched near the waterline to examine the ground more closely. That was when I saw them. The footprints were partially filled by moisture, their edges softened but unmistakable. They were not boot prints, not sandals, not bare human feet. Each impression was elongated, the toes too long, the heel too narrow, as if whatever had made them carried its weight differently than we did. They ran parallel to the shoreline for several meters before angling inland toward the jungle. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air. These tracks were not fresh in the way ours would be. They were older yet not ancient, preserved in a way that suggested the island itself had chosen to keep them. I traced one with the tip of my finger, then pulled back sharply when the sand seemed to pulse, barely perceptible, like muscle tightening beneath skin. One of the men knelt beside me and swore softly. Another scanned the tree line, rifle raised, finger resting just outside the trigger guard. Training kept us disciplined, but fear was already working its way through the formation, quiet and corrosive. "These aren't ours," someone whispered unnecessarily. I nodded, already sketching the shape into my notebook. The charcoal resisted again, lines blurring where they should have stayed sharp. The footprint on paper looked wrong, as if it belonged to a different scale of reality. I noted the length, the spacing, the direction. The stride was long, too long. Whatever had walked here did not hurry. We followed the trail inland, maintaining spacing, every step measured. The jungle swallowed sound almost immediately. Our boots made little noise on the leaf-littered ground, and even the subtle clink of gear seemed muted, as if absorbed by the vegetation. The light dimmed beneath the canopy, turning green and sickly, shadows overlapping in ways that made distance hard to judge. As we advanced, the footprints began to change. Some impressions appeared deeper, as though the ground had softened beneath greater weight. Others were shallower, lighter, inconsistent. It was as if more than one thing had walked this path, or the same thing at different times, changing as it went. My mouth went dry as I realized the tracks intersected with others, older still, nearly fossilized into the earth. I stopped and crouched again, brushing away debris with my sleeve. Beneath the leaves was stone, not natural bedrock but shaped, fitted, ancient. A fragment of carved rock protruded from the soil, its surface etched with symbols I did not recognize. They were not Japanese, not Chinese, not any island script I had seen in my travels. The shapes were too angular, too precise, worn smooth by centuries of exposure. "Sir," one of the men said quietly, "this place, it feels wrong." He was right. The jungle did not feel abandoned. It felt dormant. Every step we took seemed to tighten something unseen, like drawing a cord taut. I became aware of a low hum in my ears, not a sound but a sensation, as if pressure were building around us. We came upon a clearing that should not have existed. The trees pulled back in a near-perfect circle, revealing a patch of bare earth scattered with more of the same stone fragments. At the center stood a slab half buried in the ground, its surface carved with a crude relief. Figures stood in profile, tall and thin, facing a line of smaller shapes that looked disturbingly like soldiers, helmets, rifles, packs rendered in primitive form. Above them all loomed something larger, its shape indistinct, its head crowned with elongated points. No one spoke. No one needed to. I felt the weight of time pressing down on us, the realization that this island had been found before. Not just once. Again and again, across centuries, by different people who had arrived with weapons and certainty and left only their outlines carved into stone. A sudden crack echoed through the clearing, sharp and loud enough to make us flinch. One of the men spun around, rifle up, breath ragged. But there was nothing there. Just jungle. Just shadow. The sound had come from above. I looked up and saw a branch sway, though there was no wind. The footprints resumed beyond the clearing, leading deeper into the forest, darker now, the light thinning as if the sun itself avoided this place. I hesitated, every instinct screaming that we had seen enough, recorded enough. But the orders pressed in on me, heavy and inescapable. Observe, sketch, return. As we moved on, the sense of being watched intensified, a pressure between my shoulder blades that refused to fade. I knew then that whatever had made those footprints was no longer simply a remnant of the past. It was aware of us now, and it was guiding us somewhere we could no longer avoid. The jungle ahead seemed to close in, and somewhere beyond the trees, something rang faintly, metallic and hollow, like a bell struck far away, calling us forward whether we wished to answer or not. No man rang those bells, yet they rang with purpose, and they rang for us. Night fell faster than it should have. One moment the jungle still held a bruised green glow beneath the canopy, and the next it collapsed into darkness so complete it felt physical, like a weight pressing against my eyes. We established a perimeter out of training more than confidence, spreading just far enough apart to maintain sight lines that barely existed. The island did not allow fire easily. Our attempts to light a small cooking flame produced smoke that choked and stung, but the flame itself guttered out as if starved by something unseen. In the end, we relied on moonlight filtering weakly through the leaves, turning everything into layered silhouettes and moving black shapes. The jungle silence was worse than gunfire. No insects, no birds settling for the night. Even the distant sound of waves was gone. I had experienced quiet before, after bombardments, after ambushes, but this was different. This was a silence that listened back. I could hear my own pulse, loud and intrusive, and the shallow breathing of the man nearest me as he tried, unsuccessfully, to slow it. Midnight came without ceremony. No stars marked its passing. No change in the air. I checked my watch anyway, more to reassure myself that time still moved. That was when the sound reached us. A bell. It rang once, low and resonant, the tone deep enough to vibrate in my chest. The sound did not echo the way it should have. Instead, it seemed to sink into the ground and rise again from a different direction. Closer now. The man on the eastern edge of the perimeter stiffened. I raised my hand, signaling stillness, though every muscle in my body wanted to turn and face the noise. Another bell rang, higher this time, followed by a third, out of rhythm with the first two. Together they formed a pattern that felt intentional, almost communicative. I had heard temple bells before, rung by monks at dawn or dusk, but these were wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, as if whoever rang them understood the effect they would have on those listening. One of the scouts whispered a prayer under his breath. I did not stop him. My own thoughts had begun to fracture, slipping toward stories I had heard as a child about forest spirits and boundary places where the living were not welcome after dark. I forced myself to focus on what I could verify. Sound, direction, distance. I noted each bell's position in my notebook, though the marks felt useless even as I made them. The bells grew closer. With each toll, the jungle seemed to lean inward, shadows stretching unnaturally long. I caught glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision, nothing solid, just the suggestion of form where there should have been none. When I turned my head fully, there was only foliage and darkness. Then someone screamed. It came from the southern edge of our perimeter, sharp and brief, cut off so suddenly it chilled my blood. We broke formation without thinking, rifles up, boots pounding softly over leaf litter as we converged on the sound. The man assigned to that sector was gone. His rifle lay on the ground, strap torn clean through, metal still warm to the touch. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks leading away, just absence. The bells rang again, closer than ever now, surrounding us. Panic threatened to take hold, visible in the way hands shook and eyes darted wildly through the darkness. I forced my voice to remain steady, issuing commands that sounded thin even to my own ears. We reformed, backs nearly touching, every direction hostile, every shadow suspect. That was when the chanting began. It was faint at first, woven between the bell tones, a low murmur that rose and fell like breath. The language was unfamiliar, yet something about it felt old, deeply old, as though it predated any tongue I had learned. One of the men stiffened beside me and whispered that he recognized fragments of it from a dialect his grandmother had spoken. Words tied to spirits of land and sea that demanded offerings to remain dormant. The chanting grew louder, closer, and with it came the unmistakable sense that we were no longer being observed from a distance. We were surrounded, Not by bodies we could see, but by attention, focused and intent. The bells fell silent abruptly, leaving the chanting to fill the void. A shape moved between the trees, taller than any man, too thin. It did not step so much as glide, its outline blurring as if it were not fully anchored to the world. Someone fired. The gunshot shattered the night, deafening after so much silence. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, and for a split second the muzzle flash lit the clearing. There was nothing there. The chanting stopped. The jungle seemed to inhale. Then, slowly, sound returned. Leaves rustling, distant water, the ordinary noises of a living forest. But the damage was done. One man was missing. Another sat on the ground, shaking uncontrollably, eyes fixed on something only he could see. We did not sleep. We waited for dawn in rigid silence. Every sense stretched to the breaking point. When the first weak light filtered through the canopy, the island looked almost ordinary again. Almost. At the edge of the clearing, new footprints had appeared overnight, pressed deep into the earth, forming a loose circle around where we had stood. At dawn, with one man gone and the bells still echoing in our memories, we knew waiting any longer would only invite whatever claimed this place to finish what it had started. Some places do not decay because time itself has learned to avoid them. We moved at first light not because we were ready, but because staying felt like surrender. The jungle seemed thinner as the sun climbed, yet no warmer, as if the island rejected heat the same way it rejected certainty. Our formation was tighter now. Fewer men, fewer voices. The absence of the one we lost pressed against us harder than his presence ever had. No one spoke his name. In the army, silence was how we buried the living. The footprints from the night before led us forward again, deeper inland, but they changed as we followed them. They became less defined, less physical, fading in and out of the soil like memories that refused to settle. My compass was useless now. The needle lay still, pinned as if nailed in place. I stopped checking it altogether. Direction no longer came from instruments. It came from the island itself, subtle shifts in terrain guiding us whether we wished it or not. The trees began to thin after an hour of slow movement, the undergrowth receding into an unnatural neatness. The ground leveled, roots sinking back into the earth as though giving way to something planned. Then we saw the first structure. It was a hut, raised on short wooden stilts, its roof woven from palm leaves that should have long since rotted away. But the wood was intact, not freshly cut, not repaired, just preserved. The entrance curtain hung motionless, untouched by wind. I approached cautiously, rifle raised, every step measured. When I brushed the curtain aside, dust rose. Not decay, but fine, dry powder, as if the air itself had been sealed for decades. Inside, the hut was empty. No bodies, no tools, no personal belongings left behind in haste. Just space. Clean, deliberate space. The floor was swept. The walls bore faint carvings similar to the stone fragments we had seen earlier, their lines precise and intentional. This was not abandonment. It was completion. As we moved farther in, more structures revealed themselves, arranged in a loose circle. A village, dozens of huts, all intact, all silent. Paths ran between them, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. I could almost imagine people moving there, cooking fires burning, voices rising and falling. But there was no smoke residue, no ash, no sign of daily life interrupted. Time had skipped this place. One of the men reached out and touched a support beam. "This should be rotten," he said quietly. He pressed harder. The wood did not give. At the center of the village stood a structure unlike the others. Larger, square, built of stone rather than wood. Its surface was etched with symbols layered atop one another, as if generations had returned to carve their warnings again and again. The air around it felt heavier, charged. I felt it before I understood it. A pressure behind the eyes, a faint ringing in the ears, like standing too close to artillery fire without hearing protection. I knew, without being told, that this was a shrine. We approached slowly. No one laughed. No one mocked the idea of superstition. War had stripped us of that arrogance long ago. I noticed that the ground around the shrine was clear of debris, swept clean like the huts, yet something darker stained the earth near its base. Old, deep, absorbed. I knelt and examined the carvings more closely. They depicted arrivals by sea boats of different shapes, different eras. Some looked ancient, nothing more than hollowed logs. Others bore masts. Some even showed hulls shaped like steel. The figures stepping ashore were varied too. Tall, short, armed, unarmed. Always the same ending. They entered the village. They never left. A sound behind me made me turn sharply. One of the men had knocked over a clay vessel near the edge of the square. It shattered easily, far too easily for something that looked centuries old. Inside was nothing but fine gray powder. Ash perhaps, or something older. That was when we realized the fires had burned here once. Long ago. And whatever had lived here had not died suddenly or violently. They had been reduced slowly, deliberately to remnants. The silence pressed in again, heavier now, thick enough to taste. I became acutely aware of the way the huts faced inward, angled toward the shrine, as if the entire village existed only to observe it, or feed it. A low sound rolled through the air, not loud enough to be a voice, not sharp enough to be a bell. A resonance came from the shrine. The stone beneath my palm vibrated faintly, like a living thing responding to our proximity. One of the men staggered back, clutching his head. He muttered words that made no sense, eyes unfocused, breath rapid. Another dropped to one knee, retching despite having eaten nothing since the night before. I felt it too. A pull, subtle but insistent, as if something were tugging at thoughts I had not yet finished forming. I forced myself to stand, to step away, to regain distance. "We mark this place and leave," I said, though my voice sounded far away even to me. "We've seen enough." The jungle answered with movement. At the edges of the village, shadows shifted where there should have been none. Tall shapes slipped between huts, their outlines distorted by the angle of light. They did not approach. They watched, waiting. I understood then that this village was not abandoned. It was dormant, preserved not as a home but as a threshold, and we had crossed it without permission. The stone shrine let out another low vibration, stronger this time, and I knew with terrible certainty that whatever watched us from the trees was not the master of this place. It was only the caretaker. We were no longer being followed, we were being measured. Leaving the village did not bring relief. The moment we crossed the last ring of huts, the jungle reclaimed us with a suddenness that felt intentional, branches closing behind our backs as if sealing a door. The air grew thicker with every step, heavy enough to slow our breathing. I could feel sweat collecting beneath my uniform, soaking into fabric that never seemed to dry on this island. The shrine's low vibration faded, but the sense of pressure did not. If anything, it sharpened. We advanced in silence, senses stretched tight. The path ahead was no longer marked by footprints, yet our direction felt chosen for us. The ground sloped upward slightly, roots forming natural steps, stones positioned too neatly to be coincidence. This was not wilderness shaped only by nature. It was a place adjusted, curated over time by hands or forces that understood terrain better than any engineer. Then we saw them, not clearly, not all at once. At first, it was movement too smooth to be foliage stirred by wind. A vertical shape where a trunk should have been. A shadow that detached itself from the darkness and then merged back into it before the eye could focus. I stopped, raised my hand, and the men behind me froze instantly. Training held, even as fear crept into the spaces between us. They were tall, that much was certain. Taller than any man I had ever seen, yet impossibly thin, their proportions wrong in a way that unsettled the mind more than the body. They did not step into the open. They did not rush or threaten. They simply adjusted their positions when we moved, maintaining distance with an intelligence that felt cold and deliberate. I lifted my rifle, sighting down the barrel, though I had no clear target. My finger hovered near the trigger, torn between instinct and the knowledge that firing blindly would change everything. The jungle seemed to wait with us, holding its breath. One of the men broke. He shouted, an incoherent cry of frustration or terror, and fired into the trees. The gunshot ripped through the quiet, shockingly loud, echoing in a way that felt wrong, as though the sound were bouncing off unseen surfaces. Leaves exploded where the rounds struck, branches snapping, bark splintering. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then something moved fast. It crossed the space between shadow and soldier with a speed that defied understanding. There was a wet, tearing sound, a brief scream cut short, and then the man was gone, dragged backward into the jungle so violently that his boots left shallow furrows in the soil. The undergrowth closed behind him, swallowing his shape, his sound, his existence. We rushed forward without thinking, shouting his name, firing into the darkness, but there was nothing to hit. No blood trail, no struggle marks beyond the disturbed leaves. Just absence again, deeper and more final than before. Panic surged through the group, raw and contagious. I forced myself to breathe, to shout orders, to impose structure where chaos threatened to take over. We formed a tight defensive circle, rifles outward, backs nearly touching. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. I could feel the island's attention pressing down on us now, focused and sharp. The watchers stepped closer. They did not emerge fully, but their outlines became clearer between the trees. Long limbs bent at unfamiliar angles, heads tilted as if in curiosity. I realized then that they were not predators in the way we understood the term. They were observers, evaluators. The two men taken had not been killed out of hunger or anger. They had been selected. A thought surfaced unbidden, chilling in its clarity. We were not enemies. We were resources. One of the remaining scouts began to sob quietly, the sound breaking something inside me. I understood him. Every rule I had learned about survival in combat failed here. There was no flanking maneuver, no suppressive fire, no retreat that felt viable. The jungle around us was no longer passive terrain. It was an extension of whatever watched us, shaping paths, closing gaps, controlling distance. The air vibrated again, that low resonance I had felt near the shrine, but stronger now, closer. It rolled through my chest, setting my teeth on edge. The watchers paused, their silhouettes shifting, as if responding to a command we could not hear. I remembered the carvings in the village, the repeated arrivals, the consistent endings. This was the part that had been omitted from stone, the selection, the sorting. The realization hollowed me out. "Do not fire," I said, my voice barely steady. "Do not run." The words felt absurd even as I spoke them, but something about restraint seemed to matter here. The watchers leaned in, their forms resolving just enough for me to glimpse surfaces that were not skin, textures that reflected no light. I felt a wave of nausea as my mind struggled to categorize what my eyes refused to fully accept. One of them moved closer than the others, stepping into a thin shaft of filtered sunlight. Its outline shimmered, unstable, as if reality itself bent around it. I felt its attention settle on me, probing, weighing. Images flickered at the edge of my thoughts. Sea, fire, men kneeling, bells ringing beneath black skies. I staggered, clutching my head, fighting to keep my footing. Then, abruptly, it stepped back. The pressure eased slightly. The watchers withdrew into the foliage, melting into shadow until they were indistinguishable from the jungle itself. The resonance faded. The air lightened. For several long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. We were still alive. That alone felt like a decision made by something other than us. I knew then, with a certainty that burned deeper than fear, that this place did not act randomly. It followed rules older than war, older than any nation. We had been spared, not out of mercy, but because the island was not finished with us yet. And as we gathered ourselves and began moving again, guided by a path we did not choose, I understood the truth that settled heavily in my chest. We were no longer explorers or scouts or soldiers on a mission. We were offerings still in transit. The sea was supposed to be our escape, but the island had already decided who would leave. We moved without speaking, not because silence was tactical anymore, but because words felt dangerous. Every sound seemed to register too deeply here, as if the island itself cataloged noise the way a clerk logged names. The jungle thinned gradually, the canopy lifting just enough to let pale daylight seep through. I felt hope stir despite myself, fragile and unwelcome. Water meant distance. Distance meant survival. When we broke through the final wall of vegetation, the shoreline lay before us, and my stomach dropped. The coast was not where we had left it. The curve was wrong, the angle altered. The stretch of black sand extended farther than before, and the rock formation I had sketched earlier was gone entirely, replaced by a low rise that sloped gently into the sea. It was as if the island had rearranged itself while we were gone, erasing the path we had taken to reach it. Our boat was still there. That alone felt like a concession. It bobbed lightly at the edge of the water, rope slack, hull intact. Relief rippled through the group, sharp enough to hurt. We hurried forward, boots sinking into the sand that still resisted our weight. I glanced back once, expecting to see movement at the tree line, but the jungle stood still, watching without revealing itself. The first man reached the water and waded in, pushing the boat farther out to keep it from grounding. I followed, stepping into the shallows. The water was colder than it should have been, shockingly so, sending a jolt up my legs. It clung to my skin, heavy and resistant, as though I were wading through something thicker than water. "Get in," someone urged. The engine sputtered when we tried to start it. Once, twice. The sound felt wrong here, intrusive. On the third attempt, it caught, coughing before settling into a rough idle. We began loading quickly, movements rushed and uncoordinated now that escape felt close. That was when the sea shifted. The water around us darkened, not from shadow or depth, but as if something beneath the surface had blocked the light. The man holding the bow stiffened, his grip tightening. "Something's pulling," he said, voice strained. Before anyone could react, the water surged. Not a wave, something directional, purposeful. Two men were dragged off their feet instantly, disappearing beneath the surface without a splash, without a cry. The rope snapped taut, then went slack. The boat lurched violently, nearly capsizing. We fired into the water out of pure reflex. Muzzle flashes strobed across the surface, illuminating nothing. No shape, no movement we could track. Just disturbed water settling far too quickly. The men did not resurface. Panic detonated fully then. Discipline shattered. One scout tried to swim for deeper water, shouting incoherently. The sea swallowed him after 3 frantic strokes, pulling him under as effortlessly as a hand closing around a candle flame. I froze, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to flee even as there was nowhere left to run. The water lapped calmly at my knees now, as if nothing had happened. The engine died abruptly, silence slamming down around us. That was when I saw the stone. It jutted from the sand a few meters up the beach, partially buried, its surface carved with the same symbols we had seen inland. A spiral, a series of vertical marks, and beneath them, a familiar figure. One kneeling, hands raised, head bowed. I remembered the relief carvings, the repeated scenes of arrival and disappearance. This was not decoration. It was instruction. A realization settled over me with terrible clarity. The island did not deny passage randomly. It demanded balance. I stumbled out of the water, dragging one of the remaining men with me as the tide tugged insistently at our legs. The others followed, eyes wild, breath ragged. The sea did not pursue us beyond the shoreline. It simply waited. I approached the stone, ignoring the shouted protests behind me. My hands shook as I traced the carved symbols, the grooves worn smooth by countless repetitions. This was not surrender in the way soldiers understood it. It was acknowledgement. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that it will let some of us go. Not all." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. No one argued. They had seen the same pattern I had, felt the same pressure. Before anyone could stop me, one of the men stepped forward. He was older than the rest of us, a veteran of earlier campaigns, his face lined and tired, "I've lived longer than I should have," he said quietly. "Make it count." He knelt before the stone. The air changed instantly. That low vibration returned, rippling outward from the carving, through the sand, into our bones. The jungle behind us stirred. The sea pulled back slightly, as if making room. The man did not scream when the shadows reached him. They rose from the ground itself, folding around his form, lifting him without violence. In seconds, he was gone, absorbed into the island as completely as the others had been. The vibration ceased. The pressure lifted. "Go," I said hoarsely. We did not hesitate again. We shoved the boat into the water, the engine roaring to life immediately, eager now, compliant. The sea released us without resistance, carrying us away from the shore that had claimed so many. As the distance grew, I looked back. The island already seemed less defined, its edges blurring into mist. The shoreline shifted one last time, erasing the place where we had stood. When the fog closed in behind us, the island was gone entirely, leaving only open water and the weight of what it had taken. I knew then that no official extraction would ever acknowledge what happened there, and that survival, in this case, had come at a cost no report would ever record. Some survivors are not spared, they are sentenced to remember. We returned to base with fewer men than we left with, and no one asked why. That was the first sign that our silence had already been arranged. The officer who received us did not demand a full debrief. He did not ask for coordinates or casualty explanations. He glanced at our faces, counted us once, then again, and his jaw tightened as if confirming a number he already knew. We were ordered to sit, to drink water, to wait. Hours passed. No medic came for our shaking hands. No chaplain came for our dead. When night fell, a different officer arrived carrying a sealed folder and a portable burner. We were instructed to hand over everything. Sketchbooks, notes, compasses, watches, even personal items that had been with us on the island. My notebook, the one that refused to hold the island's shape, was taken last. I watched as its pages curled and blackened in the fire, the charcoal lines vanishing without resistance. When the flames died, the officer stirred the ashes until nothing recognizable remained. "You were never there," he said calmly. "There is no island. There was a navigational error caused by fatigue and stress. You will remember this version." No one argued. We had seen what happened to those who resisted the island. We understood instinctively now that some truths do not improve survival. We were reassigned within days, scattered across different units, different fronts. Separation was not punishment. It was containment. Shared memory is dangerous. I did not see the remaining men again, though years later I would recognize fragments of their fear in the eyes of strangers who had served in distant seas. We never spoke of it directly. We didn't have to. The war ended, as all wars do, with proclamations and paperwork that failed to account for everything left behind. I returned home older than my years, carrying a weight that did not show on any medical report. At night, I dreamed of shifting shorelines and bells ringing beneath black canopies. In those dreams, the island did not pursue me. It waited. Decades passed. Empires fell. Maps were redrawn. I tried to live as though the island belonged to another lifetime, another version of myself. Yet reminders surfaced in unexpected places. A foreign sailor in a port city, drunk and shaking, whispering about land that appeared where no land should be. A tattered book of coastal folklore mentioning wandering islands that demanded balance from those who landed uninvited. An old Allied intelligence memo I glimpsed by accident, marked classified, referencing anomalous landmass sightings in coordinates suspiciously close to where we had vanished from the world. I understood then that the island was not loyal to any flag. It surfaced when it chose to whoever crossed its threshold at the wrong moment. War merely increased the number of desperate men sailing blind, willing to step onto any shore that promised advantage. The bells still visit me sometimes, not as sound, but as sensation, a low pressure behind the eyes when I stand too close to the sea. I have learned to respect that warning. I no longer fish at dawn. I no longer sail without reason. There are boundaries older than nations, and they do not care who claims dominion over water or sky. I often think of the man who knelt so the rest of us could leave. His name does not appear on any memorial. Officially, he was lost to the sea, one more casualty swallowed by an indifferent ocean. But I know better. He became part of something that persists beyond victory or defeat. He joined the long line of figures carved into stone, a witness added to a ledger no army controls. This is how legends are born, not from exaggeration, but from omission. From reports burned, maps altered, survivors taught new versions of events until the truth erodes into rumor. People say such islands are impossible, that land does not drift and forests do not watch. They are correct according to the rules we prefer. But war has a way of forcing men into places where those rules no longer apply. I am telling this now because time is thinning, and memory fades even when it resists. I want it known that we did not conquer that island, and it did not attack us out of malice. It enforced a balance we were too arrogant to recognize. We arrived armed and certain. We left reduced and silent. If this account reaches someone who navigates by charts alone, let it serve as warning rather than proof. Not every blank space on a map is an invitation. Some are absences maintained for a reason, and some legends endure because they are still hungry, still watching the seas for men who believe every shore exists to be claimed. The island does not need to be remembered to survive. It only needs us to forget. This story is inspired by documented wartime reports, blended with folklore, and dramatized for narrative purposes.